Hi! Today I'm going to talk you through all about cervical caps. So you may be asking yourself, what is a cervical cap? I've never even heard of that. A cervical cap is a form of barrier method contraception. Barrier method contraception is a method of contraception where you literally block off entrance to the uterus. So any ejaculatory fluid can't pass through the cervix into the uterus and get you pregnant. So what a lot of people have heard of is a diaphragm. A diaphragm is a form of barrier method contraception, but it's not a cervical cap. A cervical cap specifically is literally a cap that fits over your cervix, and that's how it blocks off entrance to the uterus. The FemCap is a type of cervical cap. It's a complete, unique design, brand, patent of cervical cap, not to be confused with the cervical cap, which is obsolete. It's actually not even manufactured anymore, but it was just called and known as the cervical cap. So if you're looking up pictures or doing research on the FemCap, cervical cap, and you find this image, this weird rubbery thimble looking thing, not the same cervical cap, and should definitely know that there are a lot of differences. You're probably also going to come across a bunch of research pointing out the flaws of the cervical cap. The FemCap outdoes all of those flaws. It's designed uniquely to obliterate those flaws. The old cervical cap had the worst effectiveness rating of any method of contraception, especially with women who had given birth vaginally. In stark contrast, the second generation FemCap has increased dimensions to the brim to make up for the laxity of vaginal tone in women who had given birth vaginally. The FemCap is made of silicone, as opposed to the old cervical cap, which is made of latex. The problem with latex is that it's a porous material and it's an irritant, it's an allergenic. A lot of people experience allergic reactions to latex, which is unfortunately a commonly used material for other forms of contraception as well, the diaphragm being one of them as well. Medical grade silicone is non-allergenic and non-porous, so you're not going to have reactions to the material that the FemCap is made of. So the second major difference between the FemCap cervical cap and the old, outdated, obsolete cervical cap is the design. This is really important because the FemCap is the only contraceptive on the market that is designed this specific way. And the reason for that is because it accounts for anatomy. It accounts for the natural shape of the vagina and the way the cervix sits inside the vagina. The old outdated cervical cap, which isn't even available for sale anymore, didn't regard at all the way the cervix naturally sits inside the vagina. So the cervix is always sitting in the vagina at a tilt. If you see any anatomy book, you'll see that the vaginal walls curve. Depending on how you're sitting, there's always going to be a natural curve to the vagina. And the cervix sits inside that at an angle, always. Depending, your cervix may have a slightly different tilt, but either way, there's always a tilt. This old cervical cap didn't account for that in its design. It's just one solid piece, as if the cervix just sits straight into the vagina, and that's actually a huge design flaw. Firstly, if this is fitting over your cervix and your cervix is at a tilt, it's just warping the shape of the brim and makes dislodgement much more likely to happen, especially if something's coming into contact with it and pushing it and thrusting against it. There's a high chance that it'll actually get dislodged. Also, with this cervical cap, as you can see, the only part of its design is the dome that fits right over the cervix itself. There's no other part holding it there, making it more effective. It's just relying on the dome to fit over your cervix on its own. As you can see with the FemCap includes the dome and this really wide brim. This brim is super important. Firstly, because as you can see, it comes there's an angle to it. There's a wider part of the brim and a narrower part of the brim. The reason for that is because it accounts for the asymmetry of the vagina. It accounts for the fact that your vaginal walls aren't the same length in terms of contacting the cervix. And also because there's so much more surface area, it was designed so the natural contractions of your vaginal walls hold the dome in place for you. The natural contractions of the vagina contract inwards. So the fact that this brim is designed to funnel outwards causes a natural tension between the two, holding the cap in place over your cervix. So there's the dome part and the brim. So another flaw in the design of the old cervical cap is that because it was only the dome, there wasn't a safe way of removing the cervical cap. As you can see, the only way for me to take this off is to just reach my finger on the other side of the rim and pull it off. The problem with that is I run the risk of accidentally scratching my cervix with my fingernail without even feeling it, because that skin is really thin and not very sensitive, so you cannot even feel it if you accidentally scratch yourself. Fortunately, the FemCap takes this into account, which is why in its design there's this removal strap. So your finger or your fingernail doesn't have to come into contact with your cervix at all. Simply press on the dome, get your finger under the removal strap, and pull it off that way. So much safer. So before we wrap up, I just want to give you a few more facts about the function of this brim. So if you were to take the FemCap and flip it inside out, you never wear it like this ever, but just to prove my point or to illustrate, you can see there's a groove right where the brim meets the dome. This serves two incredible functions. The first one is it creates a little bit of an angle of the way the dome sits inside the brim. So when your vaginal walls are holding the FemCap in place, any thrusting or pressing on the dome itself is actually having the lip close even tighter around your cervix. Compare that to the old cervical cap. There's nothing there to keep it from just dislodging with penetration. It's pushing on the structure of the cervical cap itself. So the second function of this groove is to act as a reservoir for any ejaculatory fluid. So the brim is sitting inside your vagina is contracting around it, it's flaring outwards, making it securely in place, but it's also acting as a funnel. So any ejaculatory fluid coming right towards the FemCap is being funneled by the brim straight into that groove, which you have the option of lining with spermicide. So it's literally just trapping that fluid for you, holding it there for you, rendering it much more effective. As you can see with this, there's nothing to keep that ejaculatory fluid getting right up next to the lining of the cervical cap itself. Also, it does have a groove just on the inside of its rim, and unfortunately, all those years ago, there were a lot of complaints about how this groove was trapping fluid in there and apparently making removal and cleaning just way grosser. There was a lot of complaints about odors. It was nasty because it was so much harder to clean. Fortunately, this is much easier to clean. Flip it inside out, get right in there. There's no crevices for anything to hide in there and get really smelly. So those are the major differences between the FemCap cervical cap and the old, outdated, obsolete cervical cap. There's no other product like the FemCap on the market, so it's really important to be informed about how it works, why it's so effective, and why it's better for your body.